Sometimes we're just not in the mood to paint, or can't decide what to paint, or aren't excited by any of the models in our pile of shame. But when we find ourselves in these times of troubles, don't make the common mistake that we won't enjoy painting once we start it. For the first time in the history of this YouTube channel, I had no idea what I was going to paint for this week's video. Inspiration to paint comes and goes for all of us in this hobby, myself included. So when I found myself in this funk, I decided to use the one method that always seems to work. I dug through all the models I owned until inspiration caught me. And after about 15 minutes of digging, this Eldritch Omens box caught my eye. Specifically, the Eldar Ranger models with their badass cloaks and awesome sniper rifles. And then I saw there's a unit with a pilot and a sniper on a jet bike. And that's when the light bulb went off. Side note, I'm not advocating to have a massive backlog of models so large that you'll never paint half of them in your lifetime. So what I'm saying is do as I say, not as I do. But there is that great feeling of having just a small enough stockpile of models that excited you at some point, so you bought them, so you can go back when you're feeling low and not having inspiration to find something that excites you to paint. I'd pictured this sand sled flying at a high speed over a desert environment at a really sharp angle, so we can really accentuate the feeling of movement in the piece. I've never done a flying scene like this before, and I couldn't find an example of someone else doing one, but don't ever let the lack of a step-by-step process from somebody else's YouTube video or tutorial stop you from doing something awesome for the very first time. It was important to have a surface to connect the jet bike to the base with a small pin, so once I got that small tactical rock figured out, I just started sculpting the waves of a sand dune. I just pretended that I was sculpting waves on the ocean, because if watching the new Dune movie 17 times has taught me anything, it's that sand dunes and water are basically the same thing. The driver and sniper slide onto the bike pretty easily once they're built, and will be so much easier to paint separate from the bike, so I decided to put little pegs through their butts and put them on their own painting handles. I finished this building stage by smoothing all of the edges of the putty used to sculpt the sand, and I thinned down some desert sand texture paste and put a thin layer all over it. Now this texture paste does have a very fine grit, but I did feel it was a little bit clunky and covered too much of that nice sculpting of waves that I did, but that's just part of the learning process. Maybe it'll look great once we get paint on it, but I'm not going to stress over it too much right now. Part of the fun of trying something new is learning from the process and not getting hung up when not everything goes perfectly. All right, let's get to painting. And just like at the start of this project, I had no idea what I wanted to paint. I also had no idea how I was going to paint it or what intentions I had for this little scene. But the keen-eyed observers among you will have already noticed clues placed into this video as to the painting direction I decided on. And it wasn't on purpose either. But by deciding to paint this model in sub-assemblies and to use a fancy plinth to depict this scene, internally I had already chosen to really put some effort into this project. This will be no easy speed paint job. I decided on a clean, crisp, box art style paint scheme, and as I put on my initial base coats, I felt like this was something I had been missing lately. It's been a while since I painted something to a high level for some competition like Golden Demon, and with each brush stroke I got more and more excited to just put in some love to this piece and not worry about how much time it was going to take me. Now, I personally don't like to paint to the best of my abilities on every mini I do. It's a time-intensive, draining process, but every now and then it feels really good to push myself to see if I can go farther than I've gone before. And to be upfront and set expectations for you for the remainder of this video, I want to let you know I did not finish this entire project in time to get this video out to you. Not even close. I feel terrible. So instead of doing this video on how I crammed 20 pounds of painting into a 5-pound sack, I just took my time and thought I'd focus on sharing the process of this one figure and why it ends up taking so long. And while I was doing all these base coats, my mind must have been wandering a bit because I have no idea why I made clean, crisp base coats on just about every surface on the model before I moved on. I certainly don't think it's the most efficient way to paint. I was trying to make everything clean and perfect before moving on to further steps where I'd inevitably make small mistakes and have to touch up all those base coated areas again anyway. So yeah, learn from my mistake here and try to get one area to at least 50% done before worrying about moving on to the adjoining areas. After laying down a base coat, I like to establish the boundaries between what I'm painting and those adjacent surfaces. This dark lining really helps define the hardest lines and creates a definition of the object. From there, I decided to tackle the leather, chaps, and gloves. And while I did research the color scheme for these Eldar, which is that of the Bealtan Fire Dragoons for you lore nerds out there, it seems that the leathers the Rangers wear tend to be realistic, more neutral, leathery color. After a thin down wash all over the leather to give an initial shade to the creases, I worked on building down those shadows further by using that same black leather glaze to push the pigment into the areas which would catch the least amount of direct light. Usually I'd get my shadows all the way established before I'd start working on highlights, but leather is a particularly interesting material. I find you get a much more realistic look by going back and forth between shadows and highlights. By creating those distinctive light cracks and creases that worn leather is known for, and then glazing back over them with an interesting, warm, darker color, you soften those cracks for a much more realistic look. And this back and forth can take many steps, as leather has a lot of interesting imperfections and variants in warm tones. By and large, the more thin layers of paint you put on leather, the better it'll end up looking. Today's video is brought to us by Sterling Pacific, the company that worked tirelessly to design and engineer the world's perfect aluminum luggage. When I first got this thing, I was blown away by how light yet incredibly sturdy this thing is. It's like a work of art, yet it's as strong and secure as a bank vault. And how satisfying is this? The entire body of the case is made from 5052 aluminum and impact-bearing ridges, and that's the same aluminum used in the aircraft industry for high strength-to-weight ratio, corrosion resistance, and formability. Other than the tips of these little feet, there's no plastic to be found anywhere on the construction of this case. This thing is made to last for generations, and it's going to be the last suitcase you ever own. Look, I will be honest with you, these are not the most budget-friendly luggage, but if there's anything that I've learned over the years, it's that I'd rather buy once and cry once. And if you can get something that you'll never have to replace, and it is an engineering marvel, look no further. And the good news is I worked to get you the best deal possible. Sterling Pacific is offering a whopping $300 off their cases by using code NINJON at sterlingpacific.com/NINJON for a limited time. So not only can you travel in style and never again have to worry about TSA damaging something precious inside your luggage, but you can also support the channel in the process. So check out sterlingpacific.com/NINJON today. Now's a good time to remind you that you shouldn't worry about getting one section of the model 100% perfect before moving on to the next. That's a great way to burn yourself out, get frustrated about the whole project, and end up just stopping it and never picking it up again. I like to work my shadows, then build up my highlights just far enough to where they really start to look clean and crisp, and then I'll move on to the next section. Once everything hits this 80% mark, that's when I can decide what areas need more attention, and I look to improve everything slightly to push that final product for competition or display. This Fire Dragon color scheme is really interesting. It starts at a deep red down at the boots, and then it gradiates up into orange, and then an orangish yellow up at the pauldrons and the helmet. But it's not all a smooth blend. Each plate has a distinct color, so we don't have to worry about wet blending the colors. I simply mix the red and orange for those intermediary plates, and then the colors seem so much more cohesive. For the yellow, I decided to use an artist paint by Golden Acrylics, as they have so much more potent pigment concentration, and they really give us that bright punch in far fewer coats. I really wasn't sure how bright to go on all these yellow areas. I didn't want them to stand out so much more and look out of place next to the rest of the armor. But because this yellow will really bring attention to whatever we paint with it, I think it'll be okay because it's in the areas of the model we want our eyes drawn to, that the head and the shoulders should be the main focus. And the shape of the face mask is a cylinder, but it needs to have something more interesting going on, so I draw a bright line down the center to simulate the reflection of the sun and to create a bit more of a point of interest on an otherwise fairly boring shape. Now now we move on to the part of the painting process that I was both most excited for and dreading. It seems that our Eldari Rangers have these wonderful cloaks, and those cloaks are different colors based on the environment in which they are fighting in. So in my vision, it made sense to go with a nice desert-themed color, and Tzimisce Desert is honestly a beautiful color that I just find myself loving every time I use it on a model. But what I'm really fearing is the geometrical freehand pattern that all of these Rangers seem to have on their cloaks. Freehanding can certainly be daunting, but if you break it down to the basic shapes, it's not so much so. I just really need to focus on keeping straight, even lines, except when they move over the folds of the fabric. I find that I have the most stability and consistency when I'm pulling the brush towards my body, so I always position the model so I can use that same pulling motion. If I make a line too wide or not straight enough, I can just come back in with our Tzimisce Desert base color and cut that line back to fix it. And this is one of the main reasons why I only base coat the model and then do the freehand, because it's so much easier to fix any mistakes that I've made by just bringing back and fixing them with the base color. The other reason why I like doing the freehand right after the base coat step is that when I'm getting to the shading part of the cloak, I'll simultaneously be shading all of the freehand as well, and I don't have to worry about avoiding it at all. And by the same shadow glazes hitting everything, it pulls that freehand in, so it feels much more natural and is a part of that cloak. Right now, I'm not so sure I went dark enough on all the shadows on the cloak if it's not making a dramatic enough impact. But I won't know for certain until I actually get the rest of the model painted, and probably the jet bike he's riding as well, to really feel how much more I need to boost those shadows, or if they're just great the way they are. Once the cloak was all done, I did decide to futz with a couple of different areas, using a yellow shade to boost the vibrancy of the face and shoulders, and I tried out a new Pro Acryl color called Petroleum Brown to add some more depth and a slightly satin finish to the shadows of our leather. Part of the process of improving as a painter is looking at a completed section of your model and asking yourself the question, what could I do to make this better? And then trying it. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but you'll never know how far you can go if you don't ask yourself that question and try to push yourself a little more. I want the belts and pouches to also be leather, but I don't want them looking so samey same next to the chaps and gloves, so I'll go with a darker leather recipe, which I think I stole from either Darren Latham or Infernal Brush on Instagram, both of which are amazing painters with wonderful recipes in their back pockets in that classic Warhammer box art style. It's a simple Rhinox hide base coat, a Baden black thinned down to an all-over wash, and then a buildup of highlights with warm brown and temple stone. Again, you could do more rounds of thin washes and spot highlights to really sell this beaten leather look. There's not much metal on this model, so I'll use it as an excuse to try out another one of these Pro Acryl paints in dark bronze. This stuff seems like a great starting point for all sorts of metals, and with a little black wash and then a highlight of light bronze, I think our metals are good. Let's finish up this highlight with every Warhammer painter's rite of passage, which is, of course, painting gems. I'm gonna go with green because it's a nice complementary color for all the oranges and reds all over the model, so it'll create a nice contrast. After an all-over base coat of our emerald green and a black line around the edges of the gem, I take a darker wyvern green and thinly glaze it upwards towards the top and left of the gem. From there, we take our brighter ethereal green and we paint almost a J shape on the right and bottom of the gem to create that brighter highlight. I did decide to boost the brightness of the highlight a little bit more by mixing in some yellow to our ethereal green to really punch that highest highlight. And then with a small dot of white in the top left corner for that final reflection, our gem is complete. Complete. After taking over 15 hours to paint this one pilot, I realized there was no way I was going to complete this whole project for this video, and I kind of beat myself up over it. Feel like I let you down and that I owed you the entire project in one 20-minute video. But I was really loving this kind of painting and project, and I didn't want to rush it. And maybe you like this kind of a thing. I really don't know unless you tell me down below. And while you're down there, let me know if you want to see me finish up painting a sand-beaten jet bike to finish up this project in a future video. I want to give a massive thank you to my patrons who stand behind me to do projects like this even when I don't have the confidence that you all will like them. It's because of you that I feel like I can put myself out there and I have my emotional support squad behind me. I'm going to be back here again next week with another video that's got me super pumped. But make sure sometime between now and then you find time in your day to slay the gray. A new kit where the fuck